Now's a great time to be thinking about optimism, because we know this COVID pandemic is here with us, but it's not just the pandemic, it's all the ripple effects around the pandemic. Economic impacts, career impacts, impacts on our kids, our loved ones, our parents, our social lives. So you think, well, now's a good time to be thinking about that and reminding ourselves that all this COVID issues, if you like, they're creating a lot more stress in our lives. And when you think about stress, I like to think about the Harvard definition from Herb Benson, when he said, stress is a perception of a threat or a danger, accompanied by a perception that our current level of ability is less than required to cope with that threat or danger. So the bigger we see this threat, the bigger we see COVID and its impacts, and the smaller we see our abilities to deal with it, the more stress we're going to feel. But it's not just stress. The issue is that we're hardwired to feel more pessimistic when we're stressed. We all know the so-called fight or flight response. We either fight the stressor or we flight from it. And it turns out we're hardwired to run away or to feel small or to feel a lot less than the challenges around us. But there is a middle way there, apart from fighting or flighting, which is what I wanted to share with you today. Now, to understand this middle way, we've got to think about the work done by Martin Seligman, one of the founding fathers of modern positive psychology. He developed what he called learned optimism, which is all about explanatory style, or how we explain things to ourselves and others. And it turns out how you explain things to yourself and others demonstrably impacts how optimistic you are and the sort of outcomes you'll get as a result, the sort of life you'll get as a result. Now, this optimism idea obviously isn't new. Thousands of years ago, the Buddha said, all that we are arises with our thoughts. And Hamlet quite famously said in one of the Shakespeare plays, nothing's good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. And even more recently, Monty Python, it's always look on the bright side of life. But they're good issues to think about. But the real thing is, how do you go about becoming a lot more optimistic? Well, when you look at Seligman's work, he suggested that this explanatory style works in terms of how we ask ourselves questions and the answers that we decide are true. And there's three questions that are particularly important, particularly when bad events strike, like COVID and its impacts. The first of those questions is, how long will the impacts of this last? How permanent are the impacts? And what we need to remind ourselves of is, of all the reasons something's happening, in terms of how long it's going to last, we try and make it as limited as possible. We try and look at the news around vaccines for COVID. We look at all the potential short-term impacts, whether that's financial or relationship or socially, and try and focus on all that good evidence to keep it as limited in its impact as possible. The second question is, what else is it going to affect? Now, if I'm going to be stressed and pessimistic, I'm going to catastrophize. I'm going to make things affect my entire life. If I have a bad day at work or a bad issue in my career, it'll make me affect my relationships, my social network, my exercise regime. It'll have a big domino effect. So what Seligman is encouraging us to do is to make it as isolated as possible, to try and make all the reasons for the bad events happening in your life as unique and as isolated as you possibly can. And the third aspect of this, or the third question we ask ourselves, is who's in control, or how much am I in control, or how much are you in control of how you're thinking? And we know that we are always in control. We're not in control of the events happening around us, but we're in absolute control of how we think about those bad events. So this is the middle way I talked about earlier. Remember the stress response, it's either fight it or flight from it, run away from the stressors and problems that are happening around COVID. The middle way is to just remind ourselves or become aware that you have your thoughts, they don't have you. You have your thoughts, they don't have you. Create some distance between you and your thoughts and become aware that you have the ultimate choice about how you think about your life. And again, there's lots of reminders about this. I think of people like Nelson Mandela, all those years in Robben Island prison, and he kept control of how he thought, and always thought about becoming the leader that South Africa needed, or people like Viktor Frankl interned in a concentration camp, and he said, "You've got control of. They can take control of everything in your life." Except how you think. So we remind ourselves about this. And what does the evidence say? Well, all the positive psychology research around optimism over the past 20 years gives us a whole raft of great reasons to think this way. And this is all peer-reviewed, evidence-based research. When you're optimistic, like we're explaining now, you become a lot more resilient to what's going on around you. You become a lot more action-orientated, which is important because when you're feeling stressed and pessimistic, you tend to get a bit passive and not do things. So it makes you get out and be active. It makes you a lot more social, have better, stronger relationships. If you're in a sales role, it helps you sell a lot more because people like to buy from optimists, and optimists have got that bounce back you need when you hit with sales challenges. But quite apart from those, you'll also be a lot happier, like genuine happiness and self-respect. The evidence says you'll be a lot wealthier and also a lot healthier. There's lots of good work around the biology of belief and how having strong optimistic thoughts about your health is curative in its own right. So there's some great reasons to be optimistic, and I know, like you, maybe over the past couple of months you've been Netflix binging like me. I've been watching a lot of movies, a lot more than I have, I think, in my entire life. And I saw recently an old classic, Shawshank Redemption. You've probably seen it yourselves. It's basically the story of hope. It's two characters, Red, played by Morgan Freeman, and Andy Dufresne. Now, Red's an old school inmate of Shawshank. When Andy arrives, and Andy talks about the hope of getting out of the prison, and Morgan Freeman or Red said, like, hope's a dangerous thing. You don't want hope in here. You've got to give up that idea of hope. And the movie moves on, and Andy constantly tries to escape, eventually does, and he leaves Red a note, and in the note he says, Red, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. And it's useful, I think, for us in these very challenging COVID times to think about hope, think about optimism, and think about all the great impacts it can have on your life and the lives of the people that you know and love around you.